AUSA, thank you for joining us for our next Warriors Corner panel, Transforming the Lower Tier Air Domain Through Experimentation. Today's panel is led by Major General Walter Rugen, Director of FVL CFT, Major General Jay Gallivan, Commanding General of ATEC, Mr. Jeffrey Langout, Director of AVMC, DevCom, and Mr. James Amato, ATEC Executive Technical Director, Deputy the Commander. Gentlemen, thank you for joining us today.
Thanks for coming, everybody. And obviously just the video that kind of showed some of the highlights of what we did out in Dugway Proving Ground out in Utah. 23 DoD organizations, 7 partner nations, this whole notion of interoperability and winning together. Because we're going to need to be interoperable to have our intel fire maneuvers converge at decisive points to set our soldiers up to fight and win. So obviously with the 23 DoD organizations and the 7 partner nations, the 2 probably short of the 82nd most important organizations that we had out there was my battle buddy and Jeff Langout and our science and technology lead, and getting us those cutting edge technologies across a host of warfighting capabilities. But what was new with this edge is an aggressive red teaming and data collection effort led by General Gallivan's team out of ATEC. And so it was very important to me and to General Gallivan and Mr. Langout, with Mr. Amato being really the guy that was running at the tactical edge, to ensure that we are seeing ourselves, that we're not kind of in our own echo chamber, working really hard to pat ourselves on the back. We had conducted all the invitations on this exercise before February happened, before the Ukraine conflict or war kicked off. And so it became very poignant once we had all our partners and allies out there, and somewhat acute to get after, solving multiple problems that we have on our battlefield. With the 82nd operating at a joint tactical or task force level, they were able to bring in this combined force in somewhat of a very low troop but high technology space, and certainly with a European scenario. So we fought a European scenario, and again, we fought it with live threat emitters on the field at Dugway with our great partners out there. Again, the use cases as part of our kill web, we want to sense. We want to sense and do it with standoff, so that notion of deep sensing. We want to be able to communicate those coordinates back, and we want to do it in a limited bandwidth fashion. And then we want to be able to strike. Once we strike, it sets up our capability to then move and maneuver. And once we move and maneuver, obviously we need to set the conditions for those rotorcraft to then put our troops in a position of advantage. Once we're in a position of advantage, we know we're going to have a fight on our hand, and that's where, again, this notion of interoperability comes in. We went far greater distances at a faster rate with our drones. Our drones are kind of bring, again, that cost asymmetric advantage, so they're attritable. And again, as we flood the zone with drones, and you've heard me talk about this wolf pack behavior, this was our first real live flight of wolf pack, brought really to reality by Jeff Langout's guys and the folks from our advanced teaming program. Once we do that, the other vignette I would give you is we gave multiple contingencies en route, and these en route contingencies very much with the systems we had on our Blackhawks were able to be nearly simultaneously dropped to both aircrew and folks in the back of our aircraft, our ground forces. So that situational awareness, partially enabled by IVAS, partially enabled by our network capabilities, really gave us a tremendous advantage when it came to speed on the objective to get after, again, complex enemy formations and enemy contingencies. When we talk about interoperability and speed, I think we're all reminded every day that our enemies fire on detect. They fire indiscriminately. Our values and our culture, we fire on identify. We're only going to fire on things that are clear to be fired, identified as a threat. But because of that, we're behind the eight ball when it comes to agility on the tactical edge. What we saw is a number of use cases with agility and our technology enhancing our capability. The great thing was an Italian JTAC being able to call for fire on a target they observed in the 82nd sector, have a Dutch enclave mission command system port that data, that call for fire data, through their system, but then land at the JTF at the 82nd, where then fires were cleared and done so in a very, again, agile manner. We need to get after this. We're going to have to fight together. It's going to be important that we understand not only the technology, but inform our policymakers that a lot of these things need to be solved. Our Five Eyes policy might not be good enough when it comes to a very agile battlefield. And again, the data that we're collecting with our partners at ATEC go a long way towards informing that, so we can be better at the tactical edge, and we're going to have to be agile. And then I think the last thing I'll highlight and then hand it off to my partners is this notion of contested logistics. We had about a total of 200 technical objectives, 34 of which we're in the sustainment and maintenance realm, and we have to be able to fix our aircraft and our systems forward. We have to be able to do so intuitively, and then we have to be able to not fix things that don't need fixing. So when in aviation speak, if we assess that we can have it longer time on wing that exceeds the TBO, well, we want to keep it on the wing and get after cost, but also time. We don't want our soldiers taking an air vehicle off the field when we could be fighting with it. So it both helps our efficacy against our threats, but also our cost when it comes to the total cost of ownership and sustainment. So we went soup to nuts. It wasn't just FEL CFT out there. 5 other CFTs were part of that, 23 DoD organizations. DARPA was out heavily with us in this notion of swarming of our drones, and really have to say thank you all for coming out if you're here in the crowd, because it made for a very tremendous and rigorous exercise. And with that, I'll hand it over to Jeff for some comments.
Yeah, thanks. So I get to do the fun stuff. Wally comes up with all these crazy ideas and say, now we need to go demonstrate this.
Yeah.
And so we get to be the engineers, and as I like to say, we're like your prime contractor. And of course, we have our industry partners. We're nothing without our great industry partners. And so this was particularly enjoyable because, I think we're to the point now where we can say we're extremely comfortable that we can launch effects off a helicopter. We couldn't have said that 2 years ago. But today we can say we're very comfortable launching all kinds of different things. And this modular effect launcher that we've developed, for example, it's already implemented. You hear everybody talking about modular open systems approach. It's done. And we've already launched Hellfires off of it. We've launched rockets off of it. We've launched all kinds of things off of it, ALEs. And so we've already done it. So the importance of that is our partners in PU Aviation, as they then have to turn all this into a program of record, we're very comfortable that we're not giving them some crazy requirement that's unobtainium.
Right.
And that's super important. I mean, that's one of the biggest things we can do when we're out here doing all this experimentation. Most of it is designed to make sure we got a good requirement that isn't transitioning some sort of unobtainium to our partners that just is going to make their life miserable. So on the ALE stuff, I've said many times in the press that we're only going to be limited on what we use those things for by our imagination. And it's going to be just fascinating times ahead as we see how we use air-launched effects, from being able to see out further, deep sensing that the Secretary spoke about earlier this week, and then, of course, being able to sense what we need to sense, put lethality if we need to have it be lethal, and like we demonstrated, the multiple waves of drones that came in, the stuff that comes in and says, let me see what's out there, let me report back what we need to go after. Then the next wave comes in, takes care of business, and then another wave comes in and does the assessment and see if we need to do additional lethality. Another thing that we're working in that line, which I think it's really interesting and really hard to pull off, is what we call multiple simultaneous engagement technology. And what that means is, so we've got, if the decision is made, we've got multiple drones out there that we've identified, okay, you guys are going to decide to be the lethal guys. What would really be awesome is if we could hit multiple targets at exactly the same time, and in many cases, put multiple pieces of lethality on multiple targets at exactly the same time. That really causes a problem for the enemy. Unfortunately, it's really hard to pull all that off. And so there's a lot of science and technology that we're investing in to get to that point. And so, so we've had a lot of fun at Edge, and we're honored to be part of the team.
And I think, again, this notion, what you're seeing is this open system approach, not only in our mission systems, but also obviously with some of our hard points and launchers. We've needed a new launcher for our attack and reconnaissance aircraft for decades, and seeing this modular effects launcher come forward has been a big win for us. And then seeing the vision of kind of making it that USB port that then industry can design to not only the open hard points, because that's going to be standard going forward, but also the actual software. And couldn't be prouder of MSET or MEL. I think when we talk about what aviation does, and I'm stealing from my battle buddy Mac McCurry, but we want to sense, or we want to see things, we want to strike things, and then once we set the conditions, we want to air assault or move things. What you're hearing new from us lately is we want to be able to extend the network. We want to thicken and extend the network. And really, when you look at that aerial-to networking, we're pretty good at it. And this solar UAV that can stay aloft for high endurance, and again, thicken this network, help us extend the network. Again, we saw great hundreds of nautical miles at Edge. So MDO relevant distances. I've been asked if we have a role in Indo-PACOM. We certainly do. And it's this notion of coming from the lower tier of the air domain, where there's a ton of gaps that we can fight in. So we can see, we can strike, we can move, but we're also bringing our own network so we can talk and we can report. And with this whole notion of once you see and strike, also assessing, I think gets lost on some people, that we need to assess, understand if we set the conditions, if we didn't, reattack, but if we did, move and maneuver. And again, who graded us on all that? You know, the great guys out of ATEC.
Hey, Wally, thank you very much. Jim Amato here from ATEC. I wanted to spend a couple minutes talking to you about how, from the ATEC perspective, Edge 22 is a perfect example of how the Army is modernizing test and evaluation. It's an opportunity for us to shift left, to collect data earlier, find out what works well and what doesn't work well, and that enables us to find and fix problems earlier when it's a whole lot cheaper to do so. Secondly, great opportunity for early soldier feedback, right? So sometimes translating operational requirements, operational capabilities into technical specifications, it's not an exact science. And as Jeff said, we don't always get it right. So this is an opportunity for us to use soldier feedback to really help us hone in our requirements and get them better. It's an opportunity for us to test technologies, components, systems in a systems-to-systems environment with the joint force, with our allied partners in a contested environment. That's not a luxury that we get every day when we go out on our test ranges. So great opportunity for us to test in the environment that these systems are actually going to be employed in. It enables us to share the results early with all of our stakeholders, to include our industry partners. We don't always have that luxury in an operational test when it's really a program of record and being scored. But we can take advantage of these types of experiments to share what we're learning in near real time, have our partners there on site with us and show them what we are learning firsthand. And then last, it's part of our continuous campaign of learning where we are tailoring our test and evaluation strategies over time to really provide the right information that the decision makers need to keep the Army moving forward. And ultimately, what this is doing is really enable us to get at our stretch goal of reducing live testing by 1/3 by 2030 by using experimentation, modeling and simulation, live virtual constructive wraparounds to really thicken the environment, maximize our learning while optimizing the testing. And now I'm going to turn it over to General Gallivan.
Hey, thank you, Jim. Teammates, to zoom in on Wally Rugen and this cross-functional team, but really all of the cross-functional team were present at Edge, part of the learning with PEOs, PMs, requirement owners, COEs were out there together, but let's zoom in on what were we focused on. And what we did is, in support of Wally Rugen and Army Futures Command, we broke out learning demands, operationally focused questions and emphasis areas so we can help Wally Rugen as he drafts a requirements document. So we can help Jeff in the S&T world learn what doesn't work. He spends all the time making something work. We let him know what it doesn't, what it can't do, and how we're going to break it. And we treat that with reverence. It also helps with analysis of alternatives and with acquisition decisions ultimately. And so to zoom in for what Wally Rugen got feedback on as part of Edge 22, what capabilities are needed for air assault operations in multi-domain operations? How can future vertical lift enhance reach, lethality, survivability, and standoff? What capabilities can FVL employ to penetrate IADS? We did all of that feedback in support of Army Futures Command, and in particular, Wally Rugen's cross-functional team. Multiple reps and sets, multiple iterations, every single system that Wally brought out there to learn about of how can it be part of the future Army solution. Multiple reps and sets. An example, one system, 12 flights over 66 hours. That's learning. And so that's how ATEC supports the Army left of operational testing. Wally, over to you.
Yeah, and I think to that important point, I mean, ATEC really came out and resourced this. So 45 data collectors, and ultimately what it brought me was a 330-page report that is incisive and quick, right? So we're recocking right now for PC-22, and we wanted to be better fast. ATEC and poor Mike Reedy, he's up here. He probably burned a couple all-nighters to get me that paper. And then what are we going to do after that? Again, Edge 23. So this campaign of learning, it's important to us. You know, we reference ATEC. They utilize TRAC and DAC as well, so there was expertise across our analytical community. And again, it's important for me to be able to stand in front of folks and say, this is going to work, or this is where we have problems, and we're going to tighten up our act. And again, very proud of that paper. You know, we're not perfect, but a lot of things worked well that we're very pleased with, and we certainly see ourselves on what works, and what we need to reinforce, and what doesn't work and we need to get better at. Two other organizations I want to highlight before we open it up for questions. You saw in the video really the integration we're doing with our AI2C partners out of Carnegie Mellon, so the Army AI Center. So what you see there is really the interaction between autonomous systems, air and ground, and we flipped the script. We didn't have the ground lazing for the air this time. We had the air lazing for the ground, and it was effectively robot to robot. And again, seeing that autonomy at the tactical edge, we're going to need that in the future. Getting these reps and sets helps us drive both the concept and the technology to get it into hands of soldiers sooner. So we're running with requirements. We've gotten 8 approved. We'll be back into the AROC, our Army Requirements Oversight Council, 7 times next year. And that's really where Edge is driving change, because we're rapidly able to update our requirement documents with things that are achievable, and this notion of affordability is always on our mind. So with that, I'll stop filibustering. We'll take some questions, and if not, we'll keep talking until our time's up. Sydney, good to see you.
Thank you, gentlemen, very much. Sidney Friedberg, Breaking Defense. Extending the network, obviously a big topic. You know, what did you use for that? To what extent is this stuff being done in-house by FVL, CFT, as opposed to stuff being done by the network CFT? And to what extent, where you do have, you mentioned, I think, live emitters, do you have actually a live electronic warfare environment or a simulated EW,
Yes.
EA environment there?
Yes. So both good questions. So yeah, the network CFT brought the components. We brought the truck, right? So the aviators brought the Krauss glider, and then the network CFT brought the waveforms that we use to extend our network out at MDO relevant distances. So again, great partnership and learning there. It gets into this notion, Sydney, of prototyping, of flying before we buy. And it's flying not only the truck, but obviously the waveform. So we understand the strengths and limits. And again, I was actually very pleased with the endurance of Krauss and pleased with the distances we got with it. And then when it comes to the EA environment, again, Project Convergence 21. We're in full degraded and denied. We turned it on and off in this environment at times, but probably not as much as 21. Our focus was on really finding and fixing these pacing threats and then bringing that RF environment down so we could maneuver.
Sydney, if I could add also, you talk about Army learning and learning in the Joint Force and with partners. Through the Project Convergence series, our learning is getting better each time. And in Edge 22, in advance, the community of purpose plan the network beforehand. That way you can get your learning demands and you can actually get after them, and they're measurable and then accountable so the requirements community can get real feedback. That's where Army's going with the Joint Force and with our allies and partners. Every experiment we're doing, it's making us better.
Sir, thank you. Good afternoon to you all. I just wondered, in terms of the sort of experimentation and learning, I wonder what insights we have from Ukraine and how that might influence Edge going forward.
Sure, and we certainly replicated, you know, it's I call it Rugen dumb luck, right? All the invites went out before February, and so I'll re-emphasize that point, to include to our partners, right? And we had a European scenario. So we were able to pull some of those observations in to see if they truly are lessons learned, and we're continuing to turn on that. But what I would tell you coming out of Ukraine, we're watching it very acutely. This notion of not being trained and ready, I certainly think is a problem for one side and then not for another. The notion of poor tactics and getting ill-disciplined with flying over the same route at a high altitude during the day, that'll get your jaw busted, right? Every time, twice on Sunday. So we're seeing some of those things that we, you know, maybe learned, you know, want to reference maybe Black Hawk Down, where you just get a bit arrogant. But we're certainly seeing the other side of it, which is if we do it right and you set the conditions, this becomes a capability that drives the tempo of the enemy at a very much transformational battlefield geometry. This notion of multiple simultaneous engagements, that's tempo. And this tempo at greater distances, at greater speeds, with greater agility on the edge, is going to break them. And we're seeing that to an extent with some of the things that the Ukrainians have done, but certainly the lack of it, you see it, and when you have a lack of it, you have problems. We want to generate that overmatch that I discussed. Lastly, I would say this notion of standoff, right, with stand-in effects. Very much we want to understand the limit of our advance of what's hunting us and how we can be stood off with our inhabited cockpits and have stand-in effects that are overmatching the threat. And again, we're not just in our own echo chamber going, great job, you know, we hit the target. These data collectors are really giving us a good wire brushing on what worked, what didn't work at these MDO relevant distances to make sure we're ready for the future fight. Go ahead. Yeah, if you want to do it.
I'll make another pass.
Good.
I'd love to know more about Wolfpack and some of the swarming drone capabilities you all put together. How that build on what you've done before. What's new about that?
Yeah, I think we want certain behaviors out of our formations. When I use the word behavior and that concept, obviously we talk about it routinely in our enterprise of what's that ultimately going to be as part of our doctrine in our AirCav squadron, right? And so what does the AirCav squadron want to do? It wants to do reconnaissance, surveillance, and target acquisition. And there's a host of behaviors, but you could also call them TTPs, tactics, techniques, and procedures. We want to fight in the gaps. We feel like there's a lot of gaps in the lower tier of the air domain. So think about the places we can mask. Think about how we can move to a position of advantage. We can see them better at our position of advantage based on the limits of their system. We can then strike or bring non-lethal effects to bring down the environment if we want to bypass. Strike if we want to degrade or destroy, and then understand very quickly what we want to exploit out of that. We want to have autonomous things that machines do better, right? So if machines do things better because they can sense and machine-to-machine execute, think of network retrans. You know, when I was a lieutenant in Korea, you know, the retrans wouldn't work here. You had to move. Well, hopefully our machines will just understand where our best network reception is and go there and do it. It's those kind of things.
Thank you. Mark Sellinger with Janes. Just had a question about Kraus. Is that, can you talk about what your plans are for that platform? Is that something you could see acquiring at some point? Or is there something in your inventory now that could perform the same mission?
No, it's going to follow the same, you know, playbook that we have with everything, which is that's effectively, you know, a prototypical capability that's informing our requirement. We're going to fly Kraus one more time, and then obviously that's flowing into requirements document that the network CFT and the FVL CFT are doing together, and then it will flow out of there into our you know, Army system. But again, that is not something, you know, Kraus we're going to procure necessarily. What it's doing is it's helping us inform our requirements in this whole you know, concept of fly before we buy, experiment, to then transition that requirement capability, and then obviously Army decision whether it becomes a program of record or not. But we're certainly informing that requirement with what we're doing in our modeling and then on the field. We're going to fly it again just because I think we've been pleased with the things we've been able to do with it to date. And then again, as most of our industry partners do, or nearly all of them, is they're bringing some extra capability on it. We're going to see if it works and how it works. The last thing I'll say is just this sense of openness. You know, I talked about the modular effects launcher, but want to reinforce. You know, you saw the Gray Eagles on the video, but really that Gray Eagle's a test bed, and it's a test bed for MOSA. We've seen well over 60 technologies come on and come off our Gray Eagle in the 7 times we've been out to our Western test ranges. And so those are both hardware and software capabilities that we've been able to get on and off without having to go back to the OEM. So nothing against General Atomics. We love them as well. But this notion that our mission systems are fractured away from our flight critical to allow us to upgrade at the pace of technology, but also, you know, keep competition for the life cycle of our air vehicles, keep that competition up. We know that our OEMs aren't afraid to keep competing. This notion of not having a contract for life, I can tell you we're serious about it. Serious as a heart attack. And this is where Gray Eagle has proven out that concept of having our mission systems come on and off at the pace of technology so we can stay ahead of our enemies. Very, very crucial for the future force. And we're seeing great response from industry to help us realize that. So I give you a well done on that, and then don't be afraid of that. You guys compete a first time, just, you know, you're going to have to compete again and again, and it's okay.
If I could, Wally, the value proposition to you, all of us here, whether it's FVL, Next Generation Combat Vehicle, Network, all of the Army priority efforts, In the experimentation environment, we all learn together and you get immediate feedback, not third hand, on the ground, in the dirt, with soldiers, with operational units. You all get feedback on what you're doing in support of the Army. Quantitative and qualitative feedback on the spot. That's the value proposition of experimentation. And so we're all in, and we hope you remain all in with us as we go forward.
And then I'll just finish up with this. We're getting the hook, but thanks for coming. This past week, we had our Future Tactical UAS Increment 0 Clear Customs in Europe, and it's being fielded to 2CR this month in a new equipment training. This notion of soldier-centered design, having that soldier touch point in concert with our testers, spurred on by Army Futures Command, was the one thing, the secret sauce that enabled that 3-year acceleration. And why? Why did we get so motivated? I had young enlisted soldiers poking me in the chest in March of 2020 saying, I'm going to re-up for this, so re-enlist for this, and you said you'd deliver. And so we're delivering, right? And it's taken a team of teams, but we're serious about what we're doing. We're serious about what our soldiers need, and they need better stuff that's transformational. And that's one small example of getting stuff through the process and then out to our soldiers very, very quickly, years ahead of time, and we need to keep it up. So thanks for coming. Thanks for a great conference, and appreciate all your interest in Future Vertical Lift and AFC. Hooah.
Thank you, gentlemen, and thanks everyone for